The words came out of her mouth like a slap across a quiet room. She said, "You sat next to me on that bus and listened to me beg God for $20. You heard me. You SAT there and you heard me. And you never said a single word. And then what? You followed me home? You thought that was okay? You thought I was some kind of project?" The room went completely still. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there and let her words hit him one by one like he deserved every single one of them. She was shaking, not from anger, or not just from anger. It was something deeper than that. Something that comes from being seen when you didn't want to be seen. Something that comes from letting someone in slowly, carefully, brick by brick, and then finding out they were watching the whole time. She said, "How much of it did you hear?" He didn't answer right away. And that pause, that 3-second silence, told her everything. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before someone cries and they're trying to stop themselves. She said, "All of it. You heard all of it." He took 1 step toward her. She took 2 steps back. She said, "Don't. Please. Just don't." And just like that, just before he could speak, just before he could find out what he was going to say, "We need to go back. All the way back. Back to a Tuesday morning in October. Back to a city bus on Route 14. Back to a woman sitting by the window with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes closed. Back to $20 and a prayer nobody was supposed to hear." Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And if that hook already got you, share this with someone who needs to feel something real today. Drop a comment and tell me, did you think he was going to say sorry or something else entirely? I want to know. Now let's go all the way back to where this began. Mae Washington was 37 years old, and she was tired in the way that a person gets tired when they've been strong for too long. Not sleepy tired. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep fixes. The kind of tired that lives in the bones. The kind that sits in the back of your eyes when you are smiling at your kid and pretending that everything is fine and telling yourself that tomorrow will be better even when you know, deep in a place you don't let yourself visit too often, that tomorrow is probably going to be exactly the same. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had a broken elevator and a landlord who knocked on the 1st of every month before the sun was fully up. The apartment had a crack in the kitchen ceiling that she had put a piece of tape over because she couldn't afford to get it fixed and she didn't want her daughter to see it and start worrying. The tape had turned yellow by now. She changed it every few months. She told herself it was fine. Her daughter's name was Jade. She was 8 years old. She had her mother's eyes, dark and wide and full of something that looked like it was paying very close attention to the world. She had her father's laugh, which was the part that hurt sometimes, because her father had been gone for 4 years and the laugh was all that was left of him in that apartment. That and an old sweatshirt May kept folded on the top shelf of the closet that she hadn't washed in years because she was afraid if she washed it, something she couldn't name would disappear. Jade had asthma, not the mild kind that gets better as kids grow. The real kind. The kind that woke them both up in the middle of the night sometimes. May running to the bedroom with the inhaler already in her hand before she was even fully conscious, because her body had learned to sleep in a half-ready state. Always listening. Always one ear open. The inhaler cost $43 without insurance. With insurance. The insurance May had through her second job, the one at the hotel where she cleaned rooms 3 days a week. It cost $18 when the insurance worked, when the claim didn't get rejected, when the pharmacy had it in stock, and when the date on her coverage card matched up, and when nothing, for once, went sideways. Things went sideways a lot. May's main job was at a diner on the east side of the city called Patty's. She had been there for 6 years. She knew every regular by name, every booth by its personality, every creaky floorboard by its sound. She made $9.75 an hour plus tips. On a good day, the tips were real. On a slow Tuesday, she went home with $11 in her pocket and a half-eaten slice of pie she had wrapped in a napkin and saved for Jade's after-school snack. She was not a woman who complained. That is important to understand about her. She had been raised by a mother who said that complaining was a waste of energy you could be spending on solutions, and she had taken that deep into herself like a seed that grew into a tree she couldn't cut down even when she wanted to. She smiled at customers who were rude to her. She said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," and "I'll get that for you right away." She never cried at work. She had cried in the walk-in cooler exactly once, in the year after Jade's father left. One time, for 4 minutes. Then she dried her face on her apron and went back out front and refilled somebody's coffee like her whole world hadn't just shifted under her feet. She was strong the way only women who have no other option learn to be strong. Quietly, without applause, without anyone seeing. That Tuesday in October started the same way most of her Tuesdays started. She got Jade up at 6:15. She made oatmeal with little brown sugar because Jade liked it sweet, and because it was filling, and because a container of oats lasted 10 days and cost $2.19 at the discount grocery store on 5th. She braided Jade's hair in 2 plaits the way Jade liked, the way that took 12 minutes and required Jade to sit still, which Jade was not naturally good at, but which she did anyway because she understood without being told that her mama didn't have extra time. She dropped Jade at school. She walked 12 minutes to the bus stop because the car had been repossessed in August and she hadn't replaced it and didn't know when she would. She stood at the bus stop in a pair of black work shoes that had a crack in the left sole that she had sealed with super glue the week before. She had a jacket on, a dark blue one. Not quite warm enough for October, but the heavy coat she needed was at the dry cleaners because Jade had spilled soup on it 2 weeks ago, and May kept meaning to pick it up, but it cost $11, and she kept needing that $11 for something else first. The Route 14 bus came at 7:42. May got on. She tapped her transit card. She found a seat by the window near the middle. She sat down, put her bag in her lap, and looked out the window at the city moving past her. She did not notice the man who sat down beside her at the next stop. That is the truth. She did not look at him. She was staring at her phone, not scrolling, not playing anything, just staring at the screen because she got an email from the pharmacy the night before telling her that Jade's inhaler prescription was ready, but that her insurance claim had been flagged for review and could not be processed at this time, and she needed to contact her insurance provider. She had called the insurance provider that morning at 6:50 while the oatmeal was cooking. She had been on hold for 22 minutes. The hold music was a flute playing something that was supposed to be calming, but wasn't. Then someone answered and told her that the claim was under review because her coverage had lapsed for a 3-day period in September when her employer had been late submitting the monthly enrollment forms, and that while they were working to resolve it, they could not release the claim. She asked how long it would take. The person said up to 15 business days. She asked if there was anything she could do to speed it up. The person said she could submit an appeal form online. She said Jade's inhaler was already late. She said her daughter had asthma. She said 15 days was not okay. The person said, "I understand your concern, and I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, and there is nothing I can do to override the system." May had hung up. She had stirred the oatmeal. She had called Jade for breakfast with a completely calm voice. Now she was on the bus, and she was looking at the pharmacy email, and she was doing math in her head that wasn't adding up. $43 for the inhaler without insurance. She had, as of that morning, $31 in her checking account. She had 4 days until payday. She had a $12 electric bill auto pay coming out on Thursday, which meant she would have $19 after Thursday, which meant if she bought the inhaler, she would have negative $24, which meant her account would overdraft, which meant the bank would charge her a $35 overdraft fee, which meant she would start her next pay period already $60 in the hole. She sat with all of that math sitting on her chest like a stone, and then, quietly, without planning it, without even fully realizing she was doing it, she closed her eyes and she folded her hands in her lap and she whispered a prayer. Not out loud, barely even a sound, just her lips moving and the faintest breath of a voice that was meant only for God and nobody else. Please, just $20. Just enough to cover it. Please, just 20. That was all. She opened her eyes. She looked back out the window. The city kept moving. She had no idea that the man sitting beside her had heard every word. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 44 years old. He was wearing dark pants and a simple gray pullover, and a pair of shoes that were good quality but not flashy. The kind of shoes that cost money but don't announce it. He had a phone in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. He had gotten on the bus at the previous stop because his driver was in the shop, and he had told himself he would take the bus. He used to take the bus back when he had no choice, and it had taken him 40 minutes longer than it should have, and he was already late for something. He had been looking at his own phone when she sat down. He heard her whisper. He wasn't trying to hear it. He wasn't the kind of man who listened in on other people. But the bus was quiet in that early morning way where sound travels farther than it should, and she was right beside him. And the words were so soft and so real and so specific that they landed in his ears before he could stop them. Please, just $20. Just enough. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on his phone. But something in his chest did something he hadn't felt in a long time. A shift, a pull, like a door opening somewhere in a house he thought was fully closed. He had heard that prayer before, not from her, from someone else, from a long time ago, from a woman who used to whisper over her bills at the kitchen table late at night, when she thought he was asleep, and who always thought he was asleep, and who he never told that he wasn't, that he heard her, every time. The bus moved through 3 more stops. He sat there and thought about what to do. The thing about giving money to a stranger on a bus is that it almost always goes wrong. It feels like charity. It feels like pity. And people who are struggling, real people, proud people, people who have been holding their own weight for so long that their arms are numb, those people do not receive pity well. They shouldn't. He understood that completely. So he didn't pull out his wallet. He didn't tap her on the arm. He didn't say, "Excuse me, I couldn't help but hear." He just sat there, and he thought. His stop came and went. He didn't get off. He stayed on the bus. 2 stops later. She stood up. She gathered her bag and moved toward the door. He stood up too. He got off at her stop. He had never been to this part of the city in his life. He had a 9 o'clock meeting that he was now definitely going to miss. His assistant had already texted him 4 times. He walked behind her at a distance, not close enough to be alarming, not far enough to lose sight of her. He watched her walk half a block and then turn into a pharmacy. He stood outside for a moment. Then he went in. He found her at the prescription counter. She had her wallet open. She was talking to the pharmacist in a low, controlled voice. She was explaining the insurance situation clearly, factually, without tears, the way a woman who has had this conversation too many times before explains it. The pharmacist was young, sympathetic, but firm. He could see her processing what the pharmacist was saying. He could see her doing the math again in her head. He could see the moment she made a decision. She said okay. She said she would pay out of pocket. She said how much. The pharmacist said $43. She nodded. She reached into her wallet. Marcus had already stepped up to the counter beside her. Not in front of her, beside her, like he was just another customer waiting. He placed 2 $20 bills on the counter and slid them forward and said to the pharmacist, in a completely casual, almost bored voice, he thought, that covered the lady's prescription, and whatever was left, put toward the next one. May turned and looked at him. He looked back at her. And here is the thing that mattered. Here is the thing that made the difference between this being humiliating and this being something else. He did not look at her with pity. He did not smile at her the way people smile when they're doing a good deed, and they know they're doing a good deed. He just looked at her the same way you look at someone when you are standing next to them at a counter, and something routine has just been handled. He said she looked like she was in a hurry. May stared at him for a moment. Her jaw was tight. Her pride was a living thing inside her, and it was reacting like a fire that had just been blown on. She said she didn't know him. He said no, she didn't. She said she didn't take money from strangers. He said with respect, the money wasn't for her. It was for prescription. Those were different things. There was a beat of silence. The pharmacist, who was very young and had the look of someone who had just found herself in the middle of something she had not been trained for, quietly began processing the transaction. May looked at the 2 $20 bills on the counter. She looked at Marcus. She looked back at the bills. She said she would pay him back. He said that wasn't necessary. She said she wasn't asking if it was necessary. She said she would pay him back. She asked where he worked. He paused for just a fraction of a second. Then he named a building on the north side of the city. Not the company. Just the building. He said he was there most days. She nodded. She took the inhaler when the pharmacist handed it over. She put it in her bag. She said thank you in the voice of someone who finds thank you very hard to say. Then she walked out. Marcus stood at the counter for a moment. The pharmacist looked at him. He picked up his change, $3, and put it in the charity collection box on the counter. Then he walked out too. She was already half a block ahead of him, walking fast. He went the other direction. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant and said he would be late and to push the 9 o'clock back to 10:30. He did not expect to see her again. He was wrong. The next time he saw her was 11 days later. He was in the lobby of his building. The building he had named, not lied, just not said the rest of it. And she came to the front doors and walked straight up to the reception desk with the posture of a woman who has walked into intimidating rooms before and refused to let them know she found them intimidating. She told the receptionist she was looking for someone. She said she had met a man here. She had his face. She didn't have his name. The receptionist looked uncertain. Marcus happened to be crossing the lobby at that moment. He saw her before she saw him. He stopped walking. He just stood there for a moment and looked at her and felt that door open again, that door in a house he thought was closed. Then she turned and saw him. She reached into her bag and she pulled out an envelope and she walked across the lobby and she held it out to him. She said $40. She said she added the extra for the inconvenience of being on the receiving end of her terrible attitude that morning. He didn't take the envelope right away. He looked at her. He said she hadn't had bad attitude. He said she had pride. She said they were the same thing sometimes. He said, not always. She kept her hand extended. He took the envelope. He said, thank you. She nodded. She turned to leave. He said the coffee here was better than anything in the building if she had 12 minutes. She turned back and looked at him with an expression that said she was deciding something. She said she had 10. He said that was enough. They sat in the lobby cafe for 10 minutes. Then 12. Then 22. Then she looked at her phone and said she was late, and stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. And he stood up too, and they both said thank you at the same time. And she walked out, and he stood there and watched the door close behind her, and then stood there for another few seconds after that. His assistant found him in the lobby looking at a closed door and said his 10:30 was already in the conference room. He said he'd be right up. He stood there another moment. Then he went upstairs. Now the story has to slow down here, because what happened over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic. It was not a series of big moments. It was something much harder to explain and much harder to resist. It was a series of small ones, and it is the small moments in this story that matter the most. They ran into each other twice more in the next 3 weeks. Once at the same pharmacy, where she was picking up a refill, and he was there by what felt like coincidence, and they stood in the pickup line together and talked for 6 minutes about nothing important, about whether oatmeal was better with brown sugar or with honey, about whether the city buses had gotten worse, or whether they just remembered them being better, about a pothole on Route 14 that had been there for 3 years and showed no signs of leaving. She laughed once during that conversation. She covered her mouth when she did it, like she was surprised by the sound of it coming out of her. He noticed that. He filed it away. The second time they ran into each other was at the school, his company, and he still had not told her what the company was, had donated a set of new tablets to the elementary school on Birchwood Street, which was Jade's school. He was there for the small handover ceremony because the principal had asked, and because he usually said no to these things, but had said yes this time, and he did not let himself examine too closely why he had said yes. May was there because Jade was performing a welcome song with her class. He saw May standing in the back of the gymnasium with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, watching her daughter with an expression so full of love that it almost didn't fit on a human face. He stood near the back, too. Jade's class sang. Jade sang louder than most of the other kids, and slightly off-key, and with complete confidence. May pressed her lips together to contain something that was equal parts proud and amused. When the kids ran out to their parents, Jade ran to May, and May caught her and lifted her and squeezed her like she was the most important thing in the world, because she was. Jade looked over her mother's shoulder and saw Marcus standing nearby and said to May, "Who's that man?" May put Jade down and turned. She saw him, Something moved across her face. Something she managed in about half a second. She said that was just someone Mama knew a little bit. Jade waved at him. He waved back. May looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away. He left before she did. He told himself that was the appropriate thing to do. He told himself a lot of things in those weeks that he was only half believing. Now here is where something shifted. There was a woman at May's job, at the diner, named Rita, who had been working at Patty's for 9 years and who knew everything about everyone and who had the particular skill of seeing things that other people thought they were hiding. Rita was 51 years old and had been married twice and had 4 kids and had long ago decided that life was too short to waste on subtlety. Rita noticed that May had seemed different lately. Not happy exactly, not transformed, but lighter in some small way, like something had turned a single light on in a room that was usually a little bit dark. Rita said to May one morning while they were restocking the sugar dispensers, "There's somebody." May said, "Excuse me?" Rita said, "Don't excuse me." She said, "There's somebody." She asked who. May said there was nobody. Rita looked at her for a long time. Then she went back to refilling the sugar and said, "Okay, if you say so, but your okay if you say so face looks different from your actual okay face, and I've known you 6 years." May did not answer, but she thought about Marcus that night while she was washing the dinner dishes, and Jade was doing homework at the kitchen table. She thought about him the way you think about a song that you have heard a few times and can't quite get out of your head, but you're not sure yet if you actually like it or if it's just stuck. She was not a woman who dreamed carelessly. She was too practical for that. Too careful. Too scarred from the last time she had let herself believe a man was something he turned out not to be. She was thinking about him the way you think about a door that might be worth opening someday, but you are not sure yet. And you are not in a hurry, and you have gotten burned before by doors that looked like they led somewhere and didn't. Meanwhile, things were happening that she didn't know were connected. Her landlord, Sandra, a woman May had a strictly professional relationship with, meaning Sandra always wanted money, and May always tried to have it, called her on a Thursday to say that the building maintenance company had finally fixed the boiler and replaced the heating unit on the 3rd floor, which meant May's apartment would actually be warm this winter without the space heater she had been using that had cost her $40 extra a month in electricity. May thanked her. She assumed the building had finally just gotten around to it. She did not think to ask why now, after 2 years of her requesting it. She did not know that someone had contacted the building's management company and paid for the repair outright, and had asked that the tenant in 3C not be told. She did not know. Not yet. Her insurance situation resolved itself in 9 days instead of 15. She got a letter saying the enrollment gap had been reviewed and corrected, and her coverage was reinstated with no lapse. She called the insurance company to confirm, and the person she spoke with said yes. The account had been flagged for expedited review by the employer's HR contact. She mentioned it to her manager at the hotel, and her manager seemed confused and said she hadn't done anything. Must have been corporate. May accepted this. Things sometimes worked out. She was grateful. She did not know who had called the insurance company's corporate escalation line. She did not know what it had taken to get through to someone with the authority to expedite a review, or how many phone calls that had required. She did not know that the man who had made those calls had done it from his own phone, not through an assistant, because he didn't want a paper trail that connected back to him. He wanted it to feel like things just working out. And she did not know, because she didn't know who Marcus Cole was. She hadn't heard the name in that context, hadn't Googled the building he had mentioned. She was not a woman who had time for that kind of wondering. She worked 2 jobs and raised a child and got 7 hours of sleep on a good night. But she was about to find out. It happened on a Saturday. Jade was at a birthday party for a classmate, and May had 4 hours of unexpected alone time, which was rare enough that she didn't quite know what to do with herself. She cleaned the apartment. She folded laundry. She sat on the couch and tried to watch something on television, and found she couldn't concentrate. She had been thinking about Marcus, about whether she wanted to see him again, about whether she was ready for something she couldn't even fully name yet. Something slow and tentative and terrifying. She picked up her phone and opened her browser. She typed in the name of the building he had mentioned. Just the building. Just to see. The first result was a building's website. The second result was a news article from a business magazine. The headline had the building name in it, and next to the headline was a photo. She tapped the article. The photo was Marcus, not a candid, a real professional, full-on portrait, the kind that goes with profile piece. He was in a suit. He was looking directly at the camera. He looked exactly like himself, and nothing like the man who had ordered coffee in a lobby cafe and talked to her about oatmeal. She read the headline. Marcus Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises, on scaling a $4 billion company from a single idea and why he still takes the bus sometimes. She read that last part again. Why he still takes the bus sometimes. She sat very still on her couch for a long time. $4 billion. She thought about the pharmacy. She thought about $40 in an envelope. She thought about 10 minutes of coffee that turned into 22. She thought about him waving at Jade. She thought about the boiler, the insurance, the way things had been quietly, gradually getting a little bit easier, and she hadn't questioned it because she had been too grateful and too tired and too hopeful. She felt something move through her that was cold and sharp, and not anger exactly, but was related to anger the way a first cousin is related. Same blood, different face. She had let herself be seen. That was the thing that was carving through her right now. Not that he had money. Not even that he had kept it from her. It was that she had been her most unguarded, most desperate, most naked self in front of a man who had absolutely everything. And she had not known that. And if she had known it, she never would have let him close enough to see. She had been proud her whole life. Pride was how she survived. It was the thing that kept her standing when everything else was pushing her down. And now she felt it cracking, not from what he had done, but from what she had let herself believe. That he was just a man. That she was safe to just be a woman around him. That whatever was building between them was building on level ground. It was not level ground. It had never been level ground. And she had not known, and he had known, and he had let her not know. She put her phone down. She sat there for a long time. When she picked Jade up from the birthday party, Jade told her all about the cake. Chocolate with sprinkles, and they played a game where you had to keep a balloon in the air, and May smiled and nodded, and said that sounds amazing at all the right moments, and did not say a single word about Marcus Cole or $4 billion, or the way her whole body felt like it was vibrating at a frequency just below the surface. She waited until Jade was asleep. Then she sat on the couch in the dark and thought about what she was going to do. She could let it go. She could just quietly stop running into him, let it dissolve back into nothing, which was what it should have been from the beginning. A woman like her and a man like that were not on the same planet. She knew that. She had always known it. She had just let herself drift for a few weeks towards something that felt warm, and she had forgotten to check the map. She could do that, disappear quietly. She was good at that. Or she could go find him and say what she actually felt. She sat with both options for a long time. She was not the kind of woman who disappeared quietly. She was not her mother's daughter for nothing. She went to the building on a Monday morning. She walked to the front doors the same way she had walked to them before. Spine straight, chin up, pride worn on the outside where everyone could see it. She told the receptionist she needed to see Marcus Cole. The receptionist asked if she had an appointment. She said no. The receptionist picked up the phone. 30 seconds later, the receptionist put the phone down and said he would be right down. She waited 4 minutes. Then the elevator doors opened. He crossed the lobby toward her. He looked like himself, put together, calm, unreadable in a way that she was starting to understand was just how he held his face when he was actually feeling something. She said they needed to talk. He said okay. She said not here. He took her to a conference room on the second floor. A regular room. A table, chairs, windows that looked out over the street. Nothing fancy. She stood at the far end of the table. He stood near the door. And then she said it. All of it. The way we heard it at the very beginning of the story. The words like a slap across a quiet room. She said, "You sat next to me on that bus and listened to me beg God for $20. You heard me. You SAT there, and you heard me, and you never said a single word. And then what? You follow me home? You thought that was okay? You thought I was some kind of project?" He let her finish. She said, "How much of it did you hear?" He didn't answer right away. And she knew. She said, "All of it." He said, "Yes." She laughed that hard, hollow laugh. She looked at the table, at the window, at anywhere but him. She said she knew from the start that it was stupid, that someone like her had no business anywhere near someone like him, that she had let herself forget that for a few weeks because she was lonely and tired, and she had made a foolish mistake. He said it wasn't a mistake. She looked at him. He said, "Not for me." She said he needed to understand something. She said she wasn't looking for a project. She wasn't looking for a benefactor. She wasn't looking for someone to fix things for her. The boiler, the insurance. She knew. She had figured it out. She said she didn't need that. She said she had been managing before him, and she would manage after him, and she didn't need to be somebody's feel-good story. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she did not expect. He said she was right. He said everything she had just said was completely right. He said she had every reason to be standing there saying it, and he had no defense for any of it. She blinked. He said, "But there is something you don't know, something I need to tell you, not because it changes anything, not because it excuses anything, but because you deserve the whole truth." She said, "Go ahead then." He pulled out a chair and sat down, not at the head of the table. In the middle, just a chair. He put his hands on the table and looked at them for a moment. He said, "When I was 9 years old, I used to sit at the top of the stairs in our apartment on Thursday nights when I was supposed to be asleep, and I would listen to my mother sit at the kitchen table and go through the bills and whisper to herself, not to me, not to anyone in the room, just the way you do when you have run out of answers and you are asking someone bigger than yourself for help." He stopped. He said, "She used to whisper, 'Please God,' just enough to get through. And she meant $20 sometimes, or 10, or just enough that the electricity didn't get cut off before Friday." He looked up at May. He said, "When you said those words on the bus, it was the exact same prayer, the exact same voice. And I didn't know what to do. I have never known my whole adult life what to do with that particular sound, because I grew up and I built things and I made money, and that was the one sound I couldn't figure out how to make stop, because my mother is gone now, and I can't go back, and I can't give her the things I can give people now. And it doesn't matter how much I have, I still hear that sound sometimes, and I still feel 9 years old and useless." The conference room was very quiet. May stood at the end of the table. She was not moving. He said, "I'm not telling you this, so you'll forgive me. I'm telling you because you said I saw you at your most vulnerable. And that's true. And the only fair thing I can do is give you this back. This is mine." May looked at him for a long time. The thing about being a woman who is strong all the time, the thing about being a person whose armor is always on, is that when someone hands you their actual unprotected heart, you don't always know what to do with it. You have been so used to protecting yourself that receiving something real, something that asks nothing in return, can feel more dangerous than anything that has tried to hurt you. May felt that now. She pulled out a chair. She sat down. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How old was she when she passed?" He said, 62. She said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Thank you." They sat in a conference room with windows looking out over the street, and they were both quiet for a little while, and the quiet wasn't uncomfortable, which was itself a kind of answer something. She said she needed him to understand something. He said, "Okay." She said she was not a simple situation. She said Jade came first, always, end the discussion. She said she was working 2 jobs, and she was tired, and she was not someone who had time or energy for something that wasn't real. She said if this, whatever this was, wasn't real, she needed him to say so right now, clearly, so she could put it down and walk out, and neither of them would have to think about it again. He said, "It's real." She looked at him hard. She was looking for the thing in his eyes that would tell her it was a performance. She had seen that thing before, in the eyes of a man who was very good at seeming sincere right up until a moment he wasn't. She knew what false sincere looked like. This was not that. She said, "Okay." He said, "Okay." She stood up. She picked up her bag. He said he wanted to ask her something. She waited. He said there was a dinner on Friday evening, a charity event. Or, he said, actually, it is a little fancy. He said she didn't have to come. He said he understood if it was too much too soon, but if she wanted to, she said she would need someone to watch Jade. He said he understood. She said she would let him know. She walked out. She stood in the elevator going down and pressed the door close button, and then just stood there while the elevator descended and let herself have exactly 6 seconds of something that felt embarrassingly close to things she had told herself she wasn't going to feel. Then the doors opened, and she walked back out through the lobby and back into the city and back into her life. She called Rita that night. She told her approximately 14% of what had happened. She said she might have met someone. She did not say who. She did not say how. She did not say for $1 billion. Rita said, So, who is he? May said, just a person. Rita said, you don't call someone just a person unless they're not just a person. May said she would talk to her tomorrow. Rita said she better. May sat on the edge of Jade's bed after Jade fell asleep and watched her breathe, the slow, easy in and out of a child who was okay tonight, whose inhaler was on a nightstand, whose lungs were working, and she thought about something Marcus had said, about trying to make a sound stop, about the things you build not being able to reach the thing you are really trying to fix. She understood that, more than she could explain. She had built things too, not companies, not wealth, but a life, a small, tight, carefully constructed life that kept Jade safe and fed and loved and watched over. And sometimes it felt like she was building against something, against the fear that had moved into her chest the day Jade's father left, the fear that she was not enough, that what she had was not enough, that someday the thing she couldn't cover would be the thing that mattered. She was always building against that fear. She thought about a man who was building against his own version of the same fear. And she thought that maybe that was not the worst foundation in the world for two people to start from. She kissed Jade's forehead. She went to bed. She texted Marcus at 11:17 p.m. A very short text. She said, Friday works. He didn't respond for 3 minutes. She had almost put the phone down. Then her phone lit up. He said, I'll pick you up at 7. She looked at that for a moment. Then she put the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, and did not smile, specifically and deliberately did not smile, and then smiled anyway. The week between that text and Friday was a week of ordinary things made slightly charged by something running underneath them. May worked her shifts at the diner. She wiped down tables and refilled coffees, and said yes, sir, and no, ma'am, and smiled at the regulars. She picked Jade up from school. She made dinner. Pasta 2 nights. Chicken and rice one night. Breakfast for dinner because Jade loved pancakes for dinner, and it was cheap and easy, and May let herself off the hook for it because Jade was so happy about it. She helped with homework. She watched 20 minutes of a cartoon with Jade before Jade fell asleep on the couch, and May carried her to bed. All of this was exactly the same as every other week, but something was humming beneath it, something she wasn't naming yet. She borrowed a dress from Rita. She didn't tell Rita why, just that she had somewhere to be. Rita asked no questions, which was extremely unlike Rita, which meant Rita was saving them all up for later. The dress was dark green and simple, and fit May well because they were close to the same size, and when May tried it on in the bathroom mirror, she looked at herself for a long moment, and she thought, you look like yourself, not like a version of yourself dressed up to be impressive, just yourself, dressed well. She found a sitter for Jade, a teenager from the second floor named Destiny, who Jade adored and who charged $12 an hour and was completely reliable. She briefed Destiny on the inhaler, on bedtime at 8:30, on the emergency numbers written on the whiteboard in the kitchen. Marcus was exactly on time. 7 o'clock exactly. She came down at 6:58 because she was never late to anything in her life, and waiting made her anxious. He was waiting by a car that was not a limousine, a regular black car, clean, driven by someone she didn't recognize. He was in a dark jacket. He looked like himself. He looked at her when she came out the door, and his expression did something quiet and true that she decided not to overthink. He said she looked beautiful. She said she borrowed the dress. He said the dress had excellent taste in who it chose. She looked at him for a moment and then said they should go. They went. The dinner was a gala for a children's medical foundation, the kind of event where the tables have real linen and the silverware is weight and everyone is dressed in a way that represents a number with several zeros. May had been to events like this exactly once before, years ago, a wedding for a cousin who had married well, and she had spent a whole night feeling like she was one wrong step away from being found out as someone who didn't belong. She felt something like that now, but not entirely, because Marcus walked in beside her, and he had his hand lightly at her back, not possessive, not a claim, just a presence. And he introduced her, the people whose names she recognized from headlines, as just May, and no one at that table would have any idea from the way he said it that she cleaned hotel rooms 3 days a week and hadn't owned a car in 2 months. He did not make her feel small. That was the thing she'd been watching for. The subtle language of wealth when it stands next to something less, the way it sometimes can't help but assert itself. He did not do that. He was attentive without hovering. He checked on her without talking for her. When a conversation went somewhere she couldn't follow, he found a natural bridge into something else without making production of it. She sat next to him and ate food that cost more per plate than she made in a shift and listened to speeches about sick children and medical research and the gap between what families needed and what insurance covered. And at one point a speaker said something about how the scariest moment for a parent is standing at a pharmacy counter not knowing how to fill a prescription their child needs. May sat very still. She looked at her plate. Marcus did not look at her, but his hand, resting on the table, moved about 2 inches to the left, and his little finger was very lightly touching hers. She did not move her hand away. They talked on the way home. Real talking. Not the careful conversation of 2 people measuring each other, but something that had started to lose its guardrails. He asked about Jade. She told him, really told him, not the edited version she gave people who didn't need the details, but the real version, the asthma and the nights and the math she did in her head, and the way Jade sang off-key with complete confidence, and the sweatshirt in the closet she hadn't washed in years. She didn't plan to tell him about the sweatshirt. It just came out. He didn't say he was sorry, or that must be hard, or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to say. He just let it sit there for a moment, and then he said, "She sounds like someone who knows exactly who she is." May looked at him. She said, "She does?" He said, "She gets that from someone." May looked out the window. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me something real about you, not the article stuff. Something that doesn't get printed." He was quiet, too, for a moment. Then he said, "I eat cereal for dinner more than I will ever admit publicly. I have an apartment with a kitchen that was designed by someone very expensive, and I have used it to make exactly 4 things, and one of them is cereal." She said that was the most relatable thing he had told her. He said he also still slept on the left side of the bed because that was the side closest to the door when he was a kid, and he had never been able to unlearn it. She said, "Why closest to the door?" He paused. Then he said, "So if something came in the night, I could get to my mother first." She looked at him. He looked back. The car was quiet. She said she slept on the side closest to the window because Jade slept in the room across the hall, and she wanted to be oriented toward her in the night. He said, "Same instinct." She said, "Different direction." He said, "Same love." The car stopped in front of her building. She didn't move right away. Neither did he. She said, "This was..." She stopped. She said, "I had a good time." He said he did too. She said, "I'm not good at this." He said, "You're doing fine." She said, "I'm serious." "I haven't. It's been a long time since I..." She stopped again and looked at her hands. He said, "Me too." She looked up. He said, "Longer than people would probably expect." She said, "The articles probably say otherwise." He said, "The articles say a lot of things." She said, "Okay." She opened the car door. She started to get out, then stopped. She turned back. She said, "There is one thing I need you to know right now, before this goes any further, whatever this is." He said, "Okay." She said, "I'm not someone you fix. I'm not a situation. I'm not something you make right because you're mother, because of whatever you're carrying. If you're looking for absolution, I can't be that for you. I won't be." He looked at her very steadily. He said, "I know." She said, "Do you?" He said, "I'm not looking for absolution. I'm looking at you." She sat with that for a moment. Then she got out of the car. She walked to her building door and put her key in the lock. She turned back once. The car was still there. He was watching through the window. She went inside. She paid Destiny. She checked on Jade. Asleep? Breathing easy, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress in that fearless way kids sleep when they feel safe. She changed out of the borrowed dress. She sat on the couch. She thought, I'm looking at you. She put a pillow over her face. She held it there for a moment. Then she put it down and said out loud to nobody, "Oh, this is trouble." The next 3 weeks moved like something that had found its rhythm. Not fast. Nothing about this moved fast, but with a kind of forward momentum that was different from the starting and stopping of before. They talked on the phone. Not every night. Not on a schedule. Just when there was something worth saying, which turned out to be more often than either of them had expected. He called her one night to tell her there was a pothole on Route 14 that had finally been filled. She laughed so hard she had put the phone down. She called him one morning to tell him that Jade had won a reading award at school, and she needed to tell someone who would understand why it mattered as much as it did. Not just the award, but the fact that Jade had read 41 books to get it, every one of them sitting in the little beanbag chair in the corner of their apartment, mouthing the words when she didn't know them, sounding them out, never asking May to read to her, because she wanted to do it herself. He was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he said, 41 books. May said, 41 books. He said, she is going to run something someday. May said, I know. Jade met him 3 weeks in. It wasn't planned. May hadn't planned it. She had meant to take things more slowly. But Jade came home from school on a day when Marcus happened to be at the apartment, and Jade walked in and looked at him and said, "Are you the man from the school?" Marcus said he was. Jade said, "My mama says you're just someone she knows a little bit." He said that was accurate. Jade thought about this. Then she said, "Do you want to see my reading trophy?" He said he would like that very much. He sat on the couch in May's apartment, and Jade showed him the trophy, and then showed him the beanbag chair, and then showed him the stack of books, and told him about 3 of them in detail, and he listened with the kind of attention that children can always detect as real, because children have a highly calibrated sensor for adult attention, and they know immediately whether it's genuine or performance. It was genuine. May stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her daughter talk to this man, and felt something so complicated she could not have named it with one word. It was not simple happiness. It was not simple fear. It was a particular feeling that happens when something you have protected very carefully is in the same room as something that could matter, and you cannot control the outcome, and you know that, and you stand there anyway. Jade went to do homework. Marcus came to the kitchen doorway. He looked at May. She said, "She likes you." He said, "She is extraordinary." May turned back to the stove. She was making pasta, the real kind, the kind with the sauce she made from scratch, which she didn't do for just anyone, and she stirred it and said without turning around, "Don't make her like you more than she should until we know what this is." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "That's fair." She said, "It is." He said, "For what it's worth, I already know what this is." She kept stirring. She said, "I need a little more time to know." He said, "Take it." She said, "I might need a lot of time." He said, "May." She stopped stirring. He said, "I'm not going anywhere." She stood there at the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand and her back to him, and she let that land where it needed to land, which was somewhere below her rib cage, somewhere she hadn't let anything land in a long time. She said, "Pasta will be ready in 10 minutes. He said, "Okay." She said, "You can stay if you want." He said, "I want." He set the table. Jade came back out for dinner and sat between them and told them both at length about a book she was reading about a girl who discovered she could talk to horses, and Marcus asked follow-up questions that demonstrated he was paying real attention, and May ate her pasta and watched these 2 people in her kitchen and thought, this is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me. Not dangerous like harm. Dangerous like the opposite of safe. Like the kind of vulnerability that isn't weakness but feels like it. Like being on a very high place and looking down and knowing that you could fall and choosing not to step back. She chose not to step back. That is a decision this whole story is really about. Not the bus. Not the $20. Not the gala or the phone calls or the pasta dinner. The decision May Washington made, quietly and without announcement, to not step back from the edge of something real. After 4 years of stepping back. After 4 years of keeping herself small and protected and alone in a specific way that looks like strength from the outside, she chose not to step back. And then, because life is not a straight line and stories worth telling always have a moment where the ground shifts, the ground shifted. It was a Thursday night. Jade had gone to bed at 8:30. May and Marcus were talking on the phone. She was on her couch. He was in his apartment across the city. They had been on the phone for an hour. She had her feet pulled up underneath her, and she was leaning against the armrest, and her eyes were half closed, and the conversation had gotten to that slow, late-night rhythm that happens when two people have stopped performing for each other. Her phone beeped. Call waiting. She glanced at the screen. It was the hospital. She said, "Marcus, hold on." She switched over. The nurse on the line said Jade's name. She said Jade had been brought in by the after-school program. She had a severe asthma attack during the evening activities. She said Jade was stable. She said May needed to come in. May was already off the couch. She was already reaching for her jacket and her keys, and then she remembered she didn't have keys to a car because she didn't have a car, and she was calculating the bus time. 22 minutes, and the bus stopped running at 9, and it was 8:47. Her phone screen showed Marcus was still on hold. She switched back. She said, Jade is at the hospital. She gave the name of the hospital. She said she didn't have a car, and the bus wasn't going to. He said, I'm already in the car. He said, what entrance? She said, Marcus. He said, what entrance, May? She said, the main entrance on 5th. He said, 8 minutes. He was there in 6. She got in and he drove, and she sat in the passenger seat with her hands pressed between her knees. And she did not say anything, because all the words were locked somewhere in a place where fear lives, and she couldn't get to them. He didn't say anything either. He just drove. He put his hand over her hands for about 30 seconds. That was all. Jade was in a room on the pediatric floor. She had an oxygen mask. She was awake. She looked pale and small against the hospital pillow in a way that May was never going to forget. But she was awake, and when May came in and went to her, Jade reached up and grabbed her hand and said, Mama, I'm okay. May said, I know, baby. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed and held Jade's hand, and the doctor came in and explained clearly that Jade's oxygen levels were back to normal, and they want to keep her overnight for observation, and that May should not worry. This was precautionary. May thanked her. She sat with Jade. She held her hand. Jade fell asleep with her hand still in May's. Marcus had stayed in the hallway. He hadn't come in, not because he wasn't wanted, but because he understood without being told that this was May and Jade's space, and his job right now was the hallway. May came out after Jade was asleep. He was sitting in a chair in the hallway, not on his phone, not doing anything, just sitting there. She stood in front of him. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair next to him. She said, she's asleep. He said, good. She said, they're keeping her overnight. He said, okay. She said, you don't have to stay. He said, I know. She said, Marcus. He said, May. She looked at the wall across from her. She said, the first time she had a really bad attack, she was 3. I was alone. Her father had already left. I was alone, and she was 3 years old, and she couldn't breathe, and I called 911 with one hand, and I was holding her with the other, and I was so scared I couldn't feel my own feet. I got her here. We got through it. And I remember thinking, in the ambulance, when she was getting the treatment, and I could see she was going to be okay, I remember thinking that I would spend the rest of my life making sure she never had to feel that scared about anything, that I would carry all of it, so she didn't have to. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She said, I have been carrying it alone for a long time. He didn't say anything. He waited. She said, I don't know how to let anyone help me carry it. He said, I know. She said, how do you know? He said, because I watched my mother carry hers alone for 20 years, and she would not let a single person help her, and by the time I was able to help her, she was so used to the weight that she didn't know how to put it down anymore. And I thought about that when I saw you on that bus. And I think about it every time I am around you. May looked at the floor. She said, I am not your mother. He said, I know that too. She said, I'm serious, Marcus. He said, so am I. He said, you are not my mother. You are May. And the reason I am sitting in this hallway right now is not because of my mother or 20 years ago or anything except that I don't want to be anywhere else. That is the only reason. That is the whole thing. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, I'm not going to cry in this hallway. He said, you can if you need to. She said, I'm not going to. He said, okay. She didn't cry, but it was close. They sat in those chairs until 2 in the morning. They didn't talk the whole time. They talked some and sat in quiet some, the way people do when the quiet between them has become safe. A nurse came by twice. The hospital made its hospital sounds. Jade slept. At 2:15, May said he should go home. He said he was fine. She said, go home, Marcus. Get some sleep. She said, I'll call you in the morning. He looked at her. Then he said okay. He stood up. He put his jacket over her shoulders. She hadn't brought a coat. She had left in a hurry. And she grabbed it before it fell and held it and looked up at him. He said, call me the minute she wakes up. She said she would. He left. She sat in the chair and pulled his jacket around her shoulders and watched the hallway for a while, and then got up and went back into Jade's room and pulled the chair up next to the bed and took Jade's hand again and sat there in the way that mothers have sat through the night, next to their children since the beginning of time, vigilant and quiet and holding the line between their child and the dark. Jade woke up at 7. Her oxygen levels were perfect. The doctor came in at 8 and said she could go home that afternoon. May called Marcus at 7:03. He picked up on the first ring. She said, she's perfect. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, thank God. May smiled at Jade, who was eating hospital oatmeal with a very dramatic expression of displeasure and looking, May thought, extraordinarily like herself. She said, Marcus. He said, yes. She said, thank you for last night. He said, you don't need to. She said, I know I don't need to. She said, I'm choosing to. Thank you. He said, you're welcome, May. She said, the oatmeal here is terrible, by the way. He said, brown sugar or honey? She laughed. Jade looked up from her oatmeal and said, who are you talking to? May said, Marcus. Jade said, oh, tell him hi. May looked at her daughter for a long second. Then she said into the phone, Jade says hi. He said, hi, Jade. May relayed this. Jade nodded, satisfied, and went back to dramatically enduring the hospital oatmeal. May looked out the window of the hospital room at the city in the morning, at the ordinary sky and the ordinary buildings and the ordinary traffic below, all of it moving the way it always moved, indifferent and constant. She thought about where she had been a few months ago, on a bus, $23 in her account, whispering at her lap, asking for just enough. She thought about where she was now. She thought, sometimes you ask for $20, and what comes is so much larger and so much more terrifying and so much better than $20 that you almost can't hold it. But then she thought, you hold it anyway, because you are May Washington, and you've been holding things all your life, and your arms are stronger than they look. She held it. She held all of it. Jade was discharged at 2 that afternoon. They took a cab home. May paid because that felt important. She got Jade settled on the couch with blankets and the remote and a cup of the tea she liked, and Jade was asleep again within 40 minutes because recovery is its own kind of work. May sat at the kitchen table. She thought about everything that had happened since October, since a Tuesday morning in a Route 14 bus and a whispered prayer and a man who didn't get off at a stop. She had spent so much time being afraid of the wrong things. She had been afraid of being seen at her worst. But being seen at her worst had led her to someone who showed her his. She had been afraid of needing someone, but she had needed someone last night, and it had not broken her. It had given her the ability to stay in that room with her daughter without her fear eating her alive, because some of the caring was shared. She had been afraid of what it meant that a man like him could want someone like her, but she was beginning to understand that was the wrong frame. There was no a man like him and a woman like her. There was just Marcus and May. Marcus, who ate cereal for dinner and still slept on the left side of bed. May, who changed the tape on the kitchen ceiling and saved half-eaten pie and napkins for her daughter. 2 people, building things, carrying things, heading toward each other in whatever imperfect and uneven and unexplainable way people move toward the person who is meant to be in their life. She picked up her phone. She texted Marcus. She said, Jade is asleep. I'm thinking. He texted back almost immediately. He said, about what? She said, about you. Don't make a big deal about that. He said, I would never. She said, I know you're smiling right now. He said, I would also never confirm that. She said, I want to do something that I don't do. He said, okay. She said, I want to let this be a real thing. Whatever it is, I want to stop holding it at arm's length. There was a pause. A real one. A full minute of it. She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear. Appear and disappear. Then his message came through. He said, I have wanted that since a bus on Route 14 on a Tuesday morning in October. She looked at her phone screen. She looked at it for a long time. She texted back. Then let's do that. He said, okay. She said, okay. She put the phone down on the kitchen table. She looked at the crack in the ceiling. The piece of tape was yellow again. It was due for a change. She made a mental note. Then she thought, I'll change it tomorrow. Not tonight. Tonight she was going to sit here in this kitchen and let herself have the things she had been carefully not having. Tonight, she was going to let herself feel the full shape of it without pulling back or adding conditions or reminding herself of all the reasons to be careful. She was 37 years old and she was tired. Yes, but she was also, and this was new, this was a thing that had crept in somewhere between a pharmacy counter and a hospital hallway and 41 books about a girl who talked to horses. She was also something else. She was a little bit hopeful. Not naively hopeful. Not foolishly hopeful. The hard-won kind. The kind that knows exactly what it costs and decides the price is worth it. She sat in her kitchen with that feeling. She let it stay. She did not push it away. 2 weeks later, May was at the diner when a man in a very nice suit she didn't recognize came in and asked for a table, and she seated him and went back to her other tables. 15 minutes later, he called her over and said he understood she was a friend of Marcus Cole's. He said his name, and he named a company, a real estate development firm, one of the biggest in the state. He said they were looking for a community liaison, someone who could work between the company and the residents in neighborhoods where they were developing, someone who knew what people in those communities actually needed and could speak to it honestly. He said Marcus hadn't told him to come here. He said Marcus had mentioned, in passing, that he knew someone with exactly that skill set, and he had simply followed up. May looked at him for a long moment. She said she had 2 jobs, and she wasn't sure she was interested in a third. He said it wasn't a third. It was a replacement. He said the salary, and she made herself not react to the number, which was more than she made in both current jobs combined. She said she needed to think about it. He said of course. He left a card and finished his coffee and tipped 40% and left. May stood at the counter for a moment. She called Marcus that night. She said, "Did you do this?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I mentioned your name to a colleague. I said you were one of the most capable and perceptive people I had encountered in years. I said, I thought you had skills that were going to waste in environments that couldn't see them. That is all I did." She said, "That's all?" He said, "I did not offer to pay your salary. I did not ask for a favor. I named you, and I told the truth about you. What he chose to do with that is on him." She was quiet. She said, "What if I take it, and it doesn't work out?" He said, "Then you'll find the next thing. You've been finding the next thing your whole life." She said, "This is different." He said, "How?" She said, "Because now you're watching." He said, "I'll be watching whether you take it or not." She said, "That's not comforting." He said, "Yes, it is." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 days. She thought about what it meant to take a door that someone had opened. She thought about the difference between accepting help and accepting herself, accepting the fact that she had skills that deserved a bigger room, that she had spent years in spaces too small for what she was capable of, and that being helped into a larger room was not the same as being carried. She called the man in the suit on the 3rd day. She said she had some questions. He answered them. She had more. He answered those too. She took the job. She gave her notice at the diner. She cried when she told Rita, which surprised them both. Rita cried too, which surprised no one. Rita said she'd better come back and visit, and she'd better tell her everything. And if this man didn't turn out to be exactly what he seemed, she was going to be very disappointed. May said she thought he was. Rita said she knew. She said she had known since the day May came to work with that look on her face. May said, "What look?" Rita said, "The look of someone who's been carrying something alone for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to put it down. And then something happens and they remember. May looked at her. Rita said, "That look." May gave her 2 weeks. She worked them fully. She said goodbye to every regular by name. The last day, a few of them left her cards. One old man who had been coming in every Tuesday for 6 years and always ordered the same thing, and always left a precise $4 tip, left a card that said, "You made this place feel like home. Don't forget that wherever you go next." She kept that card. She put it in her wallet. On her first day at the new job, she wore a blazer she had bought herself, not borrowed, bought, and she walked in with her spine straight and her chin up, and she was the same as she had always been, just in a room that finally matched her. 6 months after a Tuesday morning on Route 14, Mae Washington was different in the way that people are different when they have decided to take up the full amount of space their life was always offering them, and they had just never claimed. She was still tired sometimes. She was still doing math in her head sometimes. Jade's asthma was still Jade's asthma. It would always be Jade's asthma. And there were still mornings that started with an inhaler and ended with both of them sitting on the bathroom floor waiting for medicine to work. Mae's back against the tub and Jade's head on her shoulder, both of them quiet. But she was not alone anymore, and that specific thing had changed the texture of everything else. Not fixed it, not removed the hard parts, just changed what it felt like to be inside them. Marcus was in her life the way that real things are in your life, not constantly, not perfectly, but consistently, present in the ways that mattered. She could call him at 11 p.m. about something that was worrying her, and he would answer. He could send her a voice note on a Wednesday afternoon that was just him saying he saw the pothole on Route 14 had opened back up again. He thought she'd want to know. Small things. Real things. The kind that add up. Jade had started calling him Marcus without the pause before it. That was the clearest sign. There was a Sunday, a specific Sunday, about 6 months in, when October had come back around and the city had gotten cold again, and the afternoon light had the particular color late fall that always makes everything feel a little melancholy and a little beautiful at the same time, when the three of them were at the park. Not a planned outing, just an afternoon. Jade was running ahead on the path with the confidence of a child who has never questioned her right to take up space in the world, and May hoped she never would. May and Marcus walked behind her. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay," he said, "that first morning. On the bus. After you got off at your stop. I stayed on the bus for 3 stops past where I should have gotten off." She looked at him. He said, "I was trying to figure out the right thing to do. And I missed my stop 3 times because I couldn't figure out." She said, "Why are you telling me this now?" He said, "Because I want you to know that I didn't follow you home. I didn't follow you anywhere. I got off at a pharmacy because I had worked out exactly one thing, that I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. And I didn't know what doing something looked like. I was figuring it out one step at a time." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "That might be the most honest thing you have ever told me." He said, "I'm trying." She said, "I know." They walked a few steps. She said, "I heard your stop go by. I heard the announcement. I noticed you didn't get off." He stopped walking. She kept walking. Then she slowed down. She looked back at him. He said, "You knew?" She said, "I noticed." He said, "You didn't say anything." She said, "I was seeing what you were going to do." He stared at her. She said, "I have been watching you figure out the right thing to do since the beginning." She said, "You're not the fastest at it." She said, "But you always land on it." He looked at her in a way she had gotten used to, that still made her look away first. Jade ran back toward them. She grabbed May's hand and said, "Come on," and pulled, and May let herself be pulled forward, and Marcus fell into step beside her. The 3 of them walked in the afternoon light. The path curved ahead, and Jade ran into the curve like the ending of it was a guarantee, and whatever was around the bend was going to be good. May watched her go. She thought about a whispered prayer on a bus, about $20 in the specific way hope sounds when it is almost gone. She thought about how you ask God for $20, and what arrives is a man who missed 3 stops because he didn't know how to be kind in the right way, but he knew he had to try. A man who sat in a hospital hallway through the middle of the night because you were on the other side of the door. A man who told you the thing that made him most ashamed and most vulnerable, and then sat in a conference room chair and let you decide what to do with it. She thought about how you go from $20 to this, whatever this was, this ordinary, extraordinary Sunday, this borrowed park and the borrowed light, and how the distance between those two things is just a series of small decisions to keep your hand extended, to not snatch it back, to let things land where they need to land. She took a breath of cold October air. Marcus walked beside her, and his shoulder was close to hers, and Jade was ahead, rounding the curve, and the whole afternoon was just the three of them being alive in the same place at the same time. May thought, this is enough. Then she thought, no, this is more than enough. This is a word on the other side of just enough. The word you don't let yourself say out loud, because you are afraid saying it will scare it away. She said it inside herself, quietly, the way she had said the prayer on the bus. Not out loud, just between her and whatever was listening. She said, thank you, not for the $20, for everything that came after. But here is what she did not know yet, what none of them knew, what was sitting waiting at the end of the path, not visible from where they were standing. In 3 days, Marcus was going to receive an offer, an enormous offer, the kind that comes once in a company's life, to expand Cole Enterprises into a national operation. It would mean 18 months of intensive work. It would mean travel. It would mean something that looked, from the outside, like everything a man spends his career building toward. And he was going to turn it down. His board was going to be furious. His investors were going to push back. The business press was going to speculate. People were going to ask questions he was not going to answer fully. The only person he was going to tell the real reason to was May. He was going to tell her on a Thursday night, sitting at her kitchen table, while Jade slept in her room, and the yellow tape was still on the ceiling crack, and the oatmeal was still in the cabinet. He was going to say, I spent 30 years building things, and I think I spent a lot of that time building towards something I didn't know I was looking for. She was going to look at him across the kitchen table. He was going to say, I found it. I'm not walking away from it. For 18 months. She was going to sit there with that for a very long time, and then she was going to say something that she had never, in her entire adult life, said to a man unprompted, without being asked first, without a safety net, without an exit already mapped. But that is a different story, for a different time. For now, a park, October light, a girl running ahead, 2 people walking behind her, not rushing, not holding back, just moving forward at exactly the pace that things need to move when they're real. That is where we leave them, and it is enough. It is more than enough.